Welcome back, my friends, to the Swiss Spot, where IT leaders share the insight with other leaders and others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas, and as in every week, I have my two co-hosts, Howard Holton, Will Lewis. Well,
How's it going?
guys,
Hey there.
So I don't know what the rest of you did over the weekend, but I went and saw the Super Bowl at a friend's house, and I don't do sports really, like not okay. So the house we were going to watch is a big Kansas City Chiefs house. So like they got I don't know they got I don't know what the Chiefs really are. So they got all kinds of like red and yellow crap in their house and all kinds of like Go Chiefs stuff.
Right.
And it was very cute, but I don't remember it because it doesn't stick with me. I don't do football, but like their mat at their door says "Welcome to," and then it's the name of the quarterback.
I see.
You know what I mean? Like yeah. And so I knew this going in. I knew they were Kansas City fans, so I wore a green T-shirt. I don't have.
Despite.
I don't. No, I don't. Yeah, just to mess with them, right? I don't have any stuff from the other teams, and this is where it actually got funny and showed my ignorance of the sports ball. So we show up and she's like, oh, I see. So, wearing green, are you? And I went, well, yeah, I got to recommend, I gotta represent my Jets. And she just goes, what are you talking about? And I went, the other team. And she goes, it's the Eagles. The Jets are never coming to the Super Bowl. They suck. I went, oh, okay, whatever. The Eagles are green though too. So it's green. I don't care. I just wasn't going to give you the satisfaction of wearing something red. And that was as far as I got with football. And then everybody at the whole party kind of knew from that point, don't ask Howard anything about football. He's very much not going to know. He thinks the Jets are playing.
Right. But you enjoyed the food and the beverages.
I enjoyed the food. I enjoyed the beverages. I enjoyed the company. I mean, even the game was good. I just didn't care about it. You know what I mean?
Did you enjoy the halftime show?
No, actually, last year's halftime show was still my favorite halftime show so far. Of any Super Bowl I can remember. Last year's was really, really good.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember last year.
And last year was better.
What was last?
Yeah. Last year's was kind of the history of Southern California rap. Right? They
right.
It had
a whole bunch of artists.
30 years of rap. It was seamless. They just did such a good job of bringing everybody, having everybody play, do their part. And really, show 30 years of kind of an important, a really important music genre and its impact and everything. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. Reminded me a lot of the music that I listened to when I was younger.
On the Grammys a couple weekends ago, I think they did the 50-year history of hip hop. Same kind of deal, a little more hardcore compared to what the Super Bowl would suggest.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I've only been one time, and I went more than 20 years ago now. And I think it was 99. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland, Ohio, for those who aren't familiar. And it's a pretty interesting location that owns nothing. All of the stuff they have on display is on loan, and they don't let you take pictures of anything, which is something I don't really appreciate in a museum, But regardless, it was really interesting. The month before I went, they had the history of the Beatles was their special exhibit. And when I went, it was the history of hip hop, which I was conflicted about because one, I knew less about it then than I do now, for sure. So it was really cool to learn, right? I love any opportunity to learn anything new. At the same time, it's not the Museum of Music. It's not the Museum of Modern Music. It's the Museum of Rock and Roll.
Right.
Rock and Roll Museum, right? And hip hop is not part of rock and roll. It's not a subgenre, nor is it rock and roll adjacent.
Right.
And so it's like this feels a little bit too out of place for me. I'm not sure this makes logical sense. Like I'm not sure I'm totally bought into the idea that that hip hop belongs in the rock and roll museum. But again, like it was probably the most thorough exhibit I've ever seen on hip hop anywhere. It was a floor and a half of information, and did make me want to go visit a really good hip hop museum.
Is there such a thing? Is there a national gallery of such a thing?
I do not know, but Netflix has a really good documentary series on the history of hip hop.
Interesting.
Really good. Multiple seasons, even like it starts in New York in the 70s, and moves all the way to the East Coast West Coast thing, which is much more aligned with when we were kids, and then into the kind of Southern uprising of rap and into more modern stuff.
Speak for yourself. It's not my generation.
That's true. True. Based on hair color, it goes Howard is the youngest, and then Mr. Lewis.
What? This couldn't be any more blonde. What are you talking about?
Sure. It's blonde like a cloudy day.
That's right.
So let me ask you a question. You just brought an interesting point. The Super Bowl has some preparation. Last year, we both agree that it had better preparation, better things, how they prepare those exhibits on display so they can see it. What about how, I know how I do it, but I would like to know, how do you guys get ready when you have to deliver like a talk on a webinar or something? Do you guys go scripted? Do you guys go free flow? Do you follow any methods?
As Howard knows, I will only ever present in public in a highly scripted fashion. Every word written down and every word I will repeat. In fact, I read the vast majority of the slides and content to which I deliver.
And as Paul knows, I do none of that. It is highly unlikely that I will even stay on the slides. It is highly unlikely I will stay on the slides. I find what I do instead is I come with an idea of what I'm going to say, kind of a point and a purpose. And then as I'm talking, I'm watching whatever people in the audience I can see. And when I see signs of engagement, I go deeper there. Sometimes that's with the slides. Sometimes that's not with the slides. My favorite thing to have happen is AV goes down and I get no slides. That's my absolute favorite. Because everybody kind of expects slides, but if AV's down, there's nothing I can do about it. We don't have any slides. So we're just going to talk. Can we just have a discussion? And without a doubt, the best presentations I've ever given were done that way, where I encourage people to ask questions. I encourage them, like, go ahead and interrupt. Just raise your hand. Just ask a question. Just, whatever works for you. And let's dig into what you find fascinating. Because what I find fascinating is what I wrote 3 days ago. You know what I mean? Like, I decided to get up and give this talk, so I've already figured out the fascinating part for me. The audience is what's going to give me something new. So it's very different. Paul and I are very different in that way.
I think there's 4 distinct categories, and I think the preparation is different for each. So as Howard described, that's his preparation for, and his delivery for in-person audience-based conversations.
Yes.
That's sort of category number 1. Category number 2 would be like a prepared webinar that has one or more guests, or you're just delivering it on your own, but it tends to be virtual, right? Opportunity number 3 would be more podcast-like, right? We're having a conversation on purpose, right? And then category 4 is more of a presentation style, but an intended audience, right? So not a mass audience in person, but a specific audience virtually. Maybe it's corporate to corporate, or a business seminar, or a strategic conversation. And I think those 4 categories we probably prepared differently for, even if the delivery is relatively the same. Right? So there is a distinct difference. So let's take the first category. There is a distinct difference between Howard and myself on how we would do an in-person delivery of a presentation.
Yes.
Certainly. I am much more likely to build a story over an hour and go through slides depicting what that story looks like. Howard builds stories, and he grabs stories as he needs to make a point, right? Or several points through the hour. I think they both are as effective, and we've gone back to back before, and I think we've entertained the audience differently, but still at the same magnitude. right?
I actually think when you and I go back to back, it's absolutely the best thing you can get, because we tag, like, if the audience is 100 people, and of those 100 people, 60 of them prefer your way, the other 40 don't, right? And then when I get up, those 40 are fed, and the other 60 have already been fed. You know what I mean? So by the time the room empties, the whole room has been fed in a way that works for them. They may not be peak happiness necessarily, but they leave fully sated, which is a very hard thing to do in a room.
Right.
And yet we also say much the same thing. Like, if we're presenting on the same topic, we're not going to have, like, you're not going to leave with wildly differing perspectives.
Right.
You're likely to leave with two perspectives that provide a complete picture.
Do you believe that your style or content changes based on the size or type of the audience? So
No.
50 people to 500 people,
No.
or a formal presentation on a main stage versus, a seminar for a group of 30 people at a banquet hall? No. Same style, same presentation.
Now, the only way that it changes is if I have a partner, if it's not just me. And then I'll acquiesce to what the partner finds more comfortable, because too many people are very, very uncomfortable with the way I do my talks. They just don't like it.
They still like it.
Well,
they refuse to be on stage with you.
No, they like more structure and less freeform. And I'm just, I like to be able to be lazy when I can. So, like,
yeah, the only times it makes a difference for me is when it's highly produced. Like, I only have 36 minutes, and the next presenter has to come, and there's commercials. Like, when it's a big audience and it's highly produced, you have to conform to something I normally wouldn't prefer to be conformed with. And it just requires me to pay much more attention to both the speed of my presentation and where I am in its relative ending, right? So I have to know whether I'm close to finish or not in order to get to the end point. So
yeah,
I don't skip over things.
You are so minute perfect. It's beyond impressive to me. That being said, I don't find that to be that much of a problem anymore, but it's mostly because I tell a lot of stories, and so I can fill in or drop a story as necessary to hit the time box within 30 seconds, which is generally what everybody's looking for.
Right.
You are impressively precise.
Thank you. Now, in fairness, a lot of that is simply practice. So I can deliver the same story hundreds of times, and therefore you get an appreciation for the timing. Now, what's interesting about this side of the spectrum is that there is no expectation in many ways that you have to conform to a highly produced routine, or that everything you say when we're on stage is assumed to be our opinion. But on the other side of the spectrum, the other category is something like a podcast that we're on here, where our general preference is to be the least prepared possible, but the preference of the producers is to be the most prepared possible, right? They want to give us topics, they want to give us questions, they want to have the splices of time that make sense. They want us to have the three sentences to answer the question. They want to provide questions to the audience, where that's less comfortable for us.
I don't know that it's less comfortable. It's just less fun.
No.
Right. Like, I was on a podcast and I really liked the podcast. I liked the presenters. And I was their guest, right? It was their podcast and I was their guest. And everything was highly not scripted, but scheduled down to the plus or minus 5 seconds. And I don't find that to be as fun, right? Just what I like about what we do is it allows us to stay with a thread for as much as the thread is interesting to us. We don't have a live audience, so I can't adjust based on the live audience. I can adjust based on the two of you. Versus when it's highly scripted, it's like, okay, cool. You just touched on something amazing. I'd really love to talk about it. I think it's super interesting. Oh no, we have to move on to the next segment. Okay, but now I have to reset my engagement. I have to reset my interest. And I have to say, for those people who listen to that podcast and podcasts like that, they know what's coming. They know how long each section is going to be. And if a section doesn't appeal to them, they can also hit the forward 15 seconds, forward 15 seconds. Okay, cool. I'm on the next segment. And we don't give people that ability. At the same time, maybe that's why we, don't have a massive audience. But we do this. We do this for us.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that it's interesting that we bring something different, and that engagement, like you said, that happen is that when you're on a conference, we're technically delivering a 30 to 45 minutes. Sometimes this podcast has been 50. I think that we did one that we went over an hour.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. I want to apologize to the audience right now. Wow.
Unless you have a long commute, then it's fine.
Yeah, but I think that the benefit, like you said, if it's too scripted, you know what is coming. So probably you can also tune out. Like you said, if I know the section that I want, I'll pay attention to that instead of paying attention to the whole process. And like one thing that I looked at is they're starting to not give a lot of the timings for some of the virtual events or webinars. So you actually have to be there the whole time. And when I asked one of the people that actually set up a lot of webinars, they said, we want the people to be engaged through the whole process. If we give them the timeline or something that is repeatable, they will tune out, like you mentioned, Howard.
It's funny, I consume differently than I present. So as an example, we might go through this process for 40 minutes and have an intention to talk about topic X, but we actually talk about X, Y, and Z through this period. And we're satisfied with its content because we felt we've provided value. But when I consume, let's say, a YouTube video, I tend to like the ones that have already have sectioned off commentary so that I can zoom to the 15-minute mark, because that's the one thing that they're trying to tell me, and that's the one I'm trying to learn. So it might be valuable to kind of do the same thing with us, right? To sort of do post-production sections so that people could find the type of information that's valuable to them. But it is interesting with our pod that we never prepare. And by that, I mean our topic isn't decided until we start, which we've talked about before. But we're pretty comfortable with most topics and in with some level of content. Even if we're making it up on the spot, we're still have an opinion on the topic at hand. Where we have done poorly in our pods, and we readily admit that some of our pods haven't been the best. In fact, so much so we might not have actually pushed some of that content.
Yeah, we've deleted a few.
Yeah, that it wasn't necessarily because we didn't have weren't prepared for the topic, because we rarely are. It's that either opinions weren't as well read as we thought they should be, or we felt that we weren't putting enough energy into the content, or we simply thought that it was not interesting enough to be consumed.
Yeah. That's the big one, right? When we thought the topic was interesting, we thought we had something to say, we said everything we had to say, and then at the end of it, we're like, I don't ever want to watch that again. You know what I mean? Like it just wasn't. The topic wasn't as engaging to us as we thought it was, and therefore we didn't feel that we put enough of ourselves in it for it to be engaging to others, and so we dropped it. Let's continue with your list, because we did live event, webinar,
live event, podcast. The third category is like a webinar, and I kind of think corporate webinar at this point. So there are a couple flavors that I have done in the past. I'm sure we all have. So flavor number one, you're the sole presenter, right? It's you delivering 15-minute, 30-minute corporate content, generally you and slides, right? Tends to be highly scripted, tends to be highly visual, right? Because we're trying to deliver a message.
Yep.
That's kind of flavor one. Flavor two, it feels podcast-like, but it's a panel of people with slides, and we're going through some content. And then finally, some sort of educational webinar where maybe it's just two people, an interviewee and you're sort of answering questions in a webinar-like format. So which one do you prefer, and do you prepare differently for each of those flavors?
So I prefer number three, where it's an interview back and forth. I prefer that one a lot, like 10 times more than the others. The one I like the least is panels. And the reason I dislike panels is for the same reason I said about podcasts, is there's never enough time to double click on anything. Right. And so you end up in this situation where it's, okay, cool. Here's the question, 30 seconds for Paul, 30 seconds for Howard. And it like make it interesting. Let's make this an hour, do 4 questions, and do it like they do a political debate. You know what I mean? Like, okay, Paul, so you said your thing. All right, Howard, 30 seconds to reply to Paul. All right, Paul, 20-second rebuttal to Howard. All right, moving on to the next question. Something like that would actually be more interesting. The number of times someone has said something on stage that I'm like, ooh, that's really interesting. What about this as an aspect of that, as a response to that, as kind of a different way to think about that? But you don't really get the opportunity to do that much in panels. And so I find panels to be the least exciting. I don't prepare for them generally. Other
than the topic is already predefined, but not the speaking points.
Yeah. The topic's pretty fine, and I may read up on the topic. Like I may go, it's been a little while since I visited that, or I want to see what's changed in the space, or I kind of want to make sure that I'm up on what people are talking about, and so I may read that. But that's as far. That's actually bit me in the ass almost every time that I've done it, because like I did a thing at a university for international business students on Southeast Asia and Southeast Asia markets. Mm-hmm. And I read, I don't know, 1,000 pages or so to make sure I was up to kind of snuff on it. But they didn't ask any questions that were relevant to that at all in any way. Like the questions were super high level. They were super generic. And I really felt robbed, because I learned all kinds of interesting things about how business operates, how people buy, how people shop, what businesses are present and why they're present, and like things like the difficulty of getting cash and the difficulty of executing transactions, and why payment apps kind of have exploded, and yet they're not payment apps we have in the West. They're payment apps specific to kind of the region, and there's a lot of conflict, and there's multiple apps, and getting into each market is difficult, and they're figuring out their sovereignty, which means the sovereignty and compliance, like all that stuff that I found to be super fascinating and super relevant to the topic. Yeah, none of that even ever remotely got brought up. And every time I try to bring something up that I thought would be interesting and useful, they just moved on. And I was like, oh, well, that was kind of a waste. I didn't feel bad that I learned the thing. I just kind of felt like you could have replaced me with absolutely anyone in the world that had ever seen a map, and likely accomplished much the same, because it was just not a super engaging or interesting talk.
How about the corporate pitch? Like you're doing a 15-20 minute deck.
It's hard for me to know if that actually resonates with anyone. They're often pre-recorded.
Right.
And so the hard part for me there is actually hitting time. I tend to run real short on those. Mm-hmm. Mostly because, like I said, I use the audience as a feedback loop to tell me to go deeper or move on. And since I don't have that, I just default to moving on, because I've probably gone over it 2 or 3 times, and it's probably not super exciting to me anymore. You know what I mean? And since I don't have anybody to play off, it's hard for me to then ramp up my passion and ramp up my excitement and really be great at those.
Yeah, it's fair. And that flavor actually comes in 3 subflavors, right? So the 3 subflavors are, they give you the deck and you can say whatever you want, which is more comfortable, right? Or they give you the deck with some theories, and then you just have to hit those talking points. And then they give you the deck with it entirely scripted, right? I find the entirely scripted one difficult, and the most difficult to record, because for the most part, nobody's writing in my voice. So how I would say something, my turn of phrase isn't what's written. And therefore I have to do some live editing, because I wouldn't say the sentence in the way that it's been written.
Right. Yeah. I agree completely.
And the second one, while easier because at least I have some talking points. While I'm talking, I'm thinking of the talking points, and I think it's taking away from its projection. I'm taking away from its enthusiasm and just the relative, surprise in what I'm saying, which creates, a different style when you're presenting. In fairness.
Yeah. Like
Let
those
me-
went first to third. Those went from most genuine to least genuine.
Right.
And I struggle anytime I don't feel like I'm able to be genuine. I struggle, and part of genuine is the words that I say, the way that I address a topic. Like all of that is part of being genuine. So it's not I'm not being disingenuous by reading someone else's script, but it's not mine.
Right.
And it's not Shakespeare, right? I'm not playing Marcus Anthony, in which case I'm representing Marcus Anthony. No, I'm representing me in a webinar. I don't get to play a character, and it makes it very so it does make it harder to do the more scripted, the harder it gets.
So with that, hearing both of you, I start thinking, which style will it attract an executive at you level? Because you're delivering content, like you said, to educate, to share a point, but if you're gonna take from your busy day to go live to the webinar or even watch the recording of the webinar, which one do you feel that is better to deliver the message to an executive level?
Well, the more genuine it is, the more it's going to resonate with anyone. It doesn't really matter who. And since executives are the least technical people in the audience generally, the less scripted, the more genuine, the more it's going to resonate with an executive, right? They're the person in the room the least interested about the stuff that marketing puts in slides.
Yeah. And in that circumstance, mage stage is your best friend, right? Because very rarely were the executives going to the sub stages, to sub sessions. So if you're not on the main stage, you're simply not going to be seen as important or as interesting. And pre-recording is difficult and it's stale and it's not an effective way to communicate, but you're not going to know that until you actually start consuming the content.
Agreed.
Panels, I agree, are the worst form of presentation, with the exception of so for two reasons. Reason number one, they tend to be boiled down to pre-written, pre-thought answers to a series of pre-written questions, and therefore not interesting. Or there's too much of a mixed match of the panelists themselves. I was on a recent panel where there were 3 product companies and a services organization, being us. They had their 10-minute bits on product overview, features and functions. I gave my 10-minute bit on thought leadership without describing the services in any grand scheme of things. And there was nothing cohesive about the 60 minutes in any way. It was not a consumable product at the end of the day. Now, if you change that to be the panelists are of equal talent, of equal background, even if they're different, right? At least they're coming from a relatively same perspective, and you make it a moderated conversation versus here's your scripted question and answer, then it's much more conversational, which is why I like to moderate something like that with straw pictures, right? Here's a interesting take on a topic. I've diagrammed it this way. What do you think in real time to this? Most panelists are not comfortable doing that. So you're going to have to find panelists that actually is comfortable doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I think,
but possible.
I think to your point, right? What often can solve it is either all the same background or all different backgrounds.
Right.
But if it's 3 in 1, it's never going to work. Right. But if it's all different, so I did one where we were all different, right? One guy represented a financial tool. I represented an advisory service. Someone else represented a cloud migration tool, and someone else represented 5G, private 5G. That actually was really good because we had no overlap with each other, but we all had interest in what each other did. And so it was a really good kind of back and forth. And the moderator was really good at letting us kind of do a little do a little chatter. Oh, that sounds really interesting. Do you guys do this? Oh yeah, we do that. And oh cool. How do you handle this? Oh, we do it this way. Or oh cool, I've seen it done this way in the past. You know what I mean? Like you get a little bit of back and forth, and they were really good about kind of managing it so it didn't run over time.
Right.
But it made for a really engaging conversation because we were all able to be, pitched by everybody else. I think that's the best way to do it. You know what I mean? And so I think it.
Do you prefer moderation or being a panelist? Moderator or being a panelist?
Oh, I'd rather be a panelist than be the moderator. But it's fine. I'll do either one. I don't know how much I care. I'm a big fan. The only way I like to be a moderator is if I can be a fan.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if I can be a fan, I'm the best moderator you'll find, because I'm just gonna be able to geek out a little bit. But if I'm not, then make me a panelist.
Right.
You know, like if it's highly scripted,
you're a Kevin Smith kind of moderator.
I am 100% a Kevin Smith style moderator. That is a perfect reference for me.
Right. I agree. I like the player coach moderation. And I like to throw strawmen up there. I like to make linkages between panelists that they hadn't thought of before. So isn't this interesting that if you're looking at each other's puzzle pieces, this is how I'd put you together. Does that make sense? Or am I out of the park? And how are you going to correct my statement? But again, it requires a different level of comfort with the panelists. And a lot of panelists, especially panelists that I've seen, are over-prepared for their content.
Yes. And they're over-prepared in a very narrow way. Right. And that's okay. This kind of goes back to our conversation about management versus leadership and how we spend all of our time on management and none of our time on leadership from an education, training, and reinforcement standpoint. Right. This is kind of the same thing, right? When it comes to presenting, we spend all of our time on the content and very little, if any, of our time on the presentation. Right. And yet the reason people are there is for the presentation. The reason people come to work is for the leadership. They don't come for the management. Right. And if we taught people how to present, if we taught people how to speak, if we taught people how to develop that voice and that presence and that persona, it doesn't matter what they talked about. You could read stereo instructions and the audience would be interested and engaged. And then add in a good presentation and you've really got a winning combination. But it's really that kind of combination that's lacking. And I think that's where you and I have spent a lot of our careers. Is being a politician instead of a scientist.
Well, how about that fourth category then? So that fourth category being a much more of an interview. You and somebody else, they are trying to learn something or getting their audience to learn something. They are less knowledgeable in the topic. You are most knowledgeable in the topic, and it's a Q&A type environment.
It's my favorite.
What preparation do you prefer? What preparation do you prefer that they have? And what's the conversation style that's the most effective?
Well, I mean, I think I said before I'm lazy, so I prefer no preparation. That's not always reasonable or possible, right? So for that, what I prefer is don't tell me your questions, don't show me your slides, let's just go. That doesn't really work. And so when I look at the slides, what I'm looking at the slides for is in what order is the story best told? And that's the totality of what I'm looking at the slides for. And then I'm likely to do some reading and some research broadly on the topic. And really, I kind of prefer to make it broad. I don't want to come in hyper-focused. I want to come in broad and then allow their questions to direct, where do I go? Where do I take it? Where do we go? What's interesting? What insight explodes in my brain when they respond to an answer I just gave? That's the most interesting for me. Ooh, you just said this thing. That made me think of this. Is this reasonable in this instance? Ooh, I think it is. Let's talk about that for a minute. Right? You just made me think of something new. I want to exit every one of those interviews having learned as much as the interviewer or more.
Interesting. I do it differently. At least I request something different. So I absolutely don't want the questions, just like you. That's not helpful for me. What is helpful is to get the set of topics that they would find interesting or appealing to their audience, because I don't necessarily always know the audience, or at least what the audience makeup is.
Sure.
From that list, and let's say it's 5, 6, 7, under a dozen, I'm prepared in my pocket with sound bites. Those sound bites generally are not factual, right? It's not 80% of people know this, that, and the other. That's not interesting nor helpful, probably, and I don't want to memorize those facts. But what I do have in my pocket is a soundbite perspective, right? Some Paulism that I would tend to repeat, and I have repeated over time on this particular topic, so that when they ask a question, the Paulism is probably still relevant to the question or any question they ask, which will lead me to double click on that Paulism. But they'll get a soundbite, something that they could cut if they needed to, and I can elaborate if I needed to on that particular topic. I don't have a scripted answer in any way because I don't know the question, but I do have the point of view that I want to be able to give them with the topic. Is that too over prepared for you?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think, like, I generally walk in with a perspective in mind. Right. But to your point, right, not a ton more than a perspective.
Yeah. Like I did a pod recently last week that was 2022 trends and the sort of determining the prognosis going forward. And they gave me 6, 7, 8 topics, and I just had what I thought was true.
Sure.
Whether or not it was backed up by facts or not, this is what I believe to be true, to be the future on this topic, and that's what I had. And if I knew their question was likely going to be, what does 2023 hold for insert topic X? And I had a point of view, and then they could ask me follow-up questions. And it's the follow-up questions that was double clicking.
Yeah.
Carlos, was that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. And thinking that a lot of people do that connection and they want to then present on events, present on webinars that could be from the company, understanding the best way that the audience will receive it, that's actually very helpful to then prepare correctly for those events. So my friends, there you have it. Make sure that you take your time to understand your learning style when you prepare. How do you prepare? Sometimes you need to work on your delivery, not so much on the deck, because people are there to listen to you, not to the deck. My friends, make sure you share, you subscribe, and we'll see you on our next episode.